improper or abuse, if you will, of the inmates. And sometimes people do things that they shouldn't do, and when they do those things, they're going to be held accountable for it, as we have demonstrated in the past. And this, unfortunately, is another one of those situations where a deputy acted improperly, and he's been held accountable for it. So let me explain the facts and the circumstances that have led to that. There was an inmate in the county jail by the name of Mario Cristo, C-H-R-I-S-T-O, who was booked into the jail last July on a charge of disorderly conduct, resisting arrest with violence, and resisting arrest without violence. He sat in the county jail until October, when his case was disposed of, and he was sentenced to 364 days. So he transitioned from being a pretrial detainee to a sentenced inmate in the county jail. He then signed up for an inmate worker status, and as an inmate worker, inmates who decide they want to do that get, in addition to their gain time, which is credit off of their sentence, they also get good time, and that's how they're compensated for their work, so they get time off their sentence. So Cristo was on a work crew. He was assigned in the kitchen area at the jail, and was working on that work crew from October until really the time of his release, which was last week. But on January 11th of this year, at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Cristo was working in the kitchen and taking out trash and food that had been dumped into a bunch of different containers. And I'll show you a video of it here in a second. And he was being supervised by deputies James Moran and Matthew O'Neill. So Cristo and other inmates were taking the food out to a dumpster. And when they got to the loading dock area into the dumpster is when one of the inmates, who it later turned out to be Cristo, took a cookie and tossed it to a bird that was landing on top of the dumpster. So for most people, and anybody that's got any dose of common sense, reality, perspective, it's no big deal, whatever. The inmate fed a cookie that was going into the dumpster to a bird. But apparently, all of those things that I just described, Deputy James Moran doesn't have. So he called out and using profanity, asking the inmate workers who had tossed the cookie to the bird. And Cristo acknowledged that he had. So again, using profanity, Moran told him to come over, and I'll show you the video. He told him to come over to where Moran was standing and to, quote, drop and give him 50. So he was going to punish the inmate for feeding the cookie to the bird by making him do 50 push-ups. So Cristo got down on the ground and started doing these push-ups. And he got to probably somewhere, if you count them, somewhere around 23, 24 push-ups, and he simply was exhausted at that point. Or as some would say, he was gassed. He couldn't do it anymore. So he put himself in a kind of a plank position, leaning forward position, and Moran stood there for a second, and he walked over and he kicked Cristo in the side. At that point, and he kicked him because he had stopped, so he's punishing him for not continuing doing these push-ups. We don't do that. Number one is that we don't have inmates do any form of physical labor, physical punishment. One, there was nothing to punish him for. All he did was toss a piece of trash cookie to a bird, number one. Number two is, even if there was a rule violation, then there are policies and procedures to go through in the jail through disciplinary review for inmates to violate the rules, and it goes through a process. We don't have inmates do physical labor or punishment for violation of rules, which this was none of the above anyway. And then certainly, as the inmate is there and exhausted, for him to go up and to kick him because he stopped. So at that point, Cristo stayed in that position. He was able to get up for a moment, then he got back down, and Moran told him to resume. But he was simply exhausted and he couldn't. So eventually, Moran let him up without finishing his 50 push-ups. Cristo said he was injured. He said he felt like, although there's no evidence of it, he felt like he had broken a rib. He never sought any medical attention, and he never told anybody about it out of fear for retribution, out of fear of retaliation if he brought it forward. So he got out of jail last Tuesday morning on April 16th. And as soon as he got out of jail, he contacted our internal affairs section. We've conducted an investigation into it. We had to look for and found the video and conduct some other interviews. Moran was brought in this morning, and he's been arrested and charged with 1 count of simple battery for kicking Christo. He was immediately terminated. There's another deputy who, as I said, was present during this, and that is Matthew O'Neill. And there's a current internal affairs investigation regarding O'Neill, so I won't comment any further on that because it's the subject of a current, internal affairs investigation. So that's what happened. We got the video. I'll show you the video, play it for you. It's not that long, a couple minutes, and pretty much speaks for itself. So go ahead and play it. The deputy with the hat on is Moran. Watch the bird. Here comes the bird. It lands on top of the dumpster. So he's already tossed the cookie. You had to watch closely for it. So at this point, he just can't go anymore because he's exhausted. And after Moran kicks him here, you'll see where he looks like he's going to kick him twice more. And he looks like again here, he doesn't, but it looks like he's going to do it. He goes at him because he's not moving, he's exhausted. It looks like it, and then he stops. You can stop this. We'll give you a copy of the whole thing, but that's basically it. So again, that's what happened. That's the result. He's going to be booked into the county jail. 1 count of simple battery. He's been fired. We'll conduct the internal affairs investigation regarding O'Neill, see where that goes. Of course, the concern with O'Neill is that he was present and didn't do anything to stop it and didn't report it. So, questions?
So it looks as though the inmate didn't have a problem, like just easily going down to do the 50 push-ups. It looks like, is this something that you're investigating that maybe this deputy has done before with other inmates? Because it looked like it was just like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll do 50 push-ups, whatever.
Yeah, we'll look into that. I certainly hope that's not the case, because that is never anything that is acceptable, and never anything that should be done. And obviously it would give you concern if it was, but we don't allow that. We don't condone that. That has no place. Any type of physical punishment or any type of corporal punishment, if you will, or any type of action on the part of the deputies making the inmates do something physical in response to misconduct or alleged misconduct has no place in a jail. You don't do that, and we have processes. So, we'll look into it, and I certainly hope that's not the case.
Should this, I mean, the inmate waited till he was released before he said something.
Right.
Is there, I mean, I guess it's up to them to come forward, but prior to that.
Well, O'Neill should have come forward as soon as it happened. I mean, really, and I can understand, I think anybody can understand why the inmates wouldn't come forward. Either Christo himself or those other 2 inmate workers who were with him, coming forward and making a complaint about a deputy and that they're still in the jail. Now, if they had, we would have taken steps to ensure their safety, but I can understand why he claimed the reason why he didn't come forward, and there's no way that we would have been able to detect it absent O'Neill doing what he should have done, which is to report it. But there's no way that we would have known this without somebody coming forward, because, again, it's captured on video. But there are, to say that there are a plethora of cameras in the jail is an understatement, and they record 24/7, 365. There's no way anybody's sitting there watching live all those cameras all the time.
What about his background? Has he had complaints in the past?
Who, Moran?
Yes.
Yeah, he's had some discipline. We'll release his personnel file to you and his disciplinary history. I wouldn't say it's anything I would consider to be serious, and nothing along these lines. I believe he had 1 prior discipline incident.
Do you know what it was related to offhand?
Yeah, off the top of my head, I don't remember. It's nothing that is, we'll give you the file on it. It was a couple of years ago. He's been with us for about 6 years, just about 6.5 years. Moran's been a deputy. He's 57 years old, and he's been with us about 6.5 years.
Where was he prior to working for your agency?
You have to look at the personnel file for all that. It wasn't a law enforcement agency. It was something in the private sector that he was doing.
And when it comes to Christo, when you hear kitchen duty and whatnot, that to me signifies an offender, an inmate that hasn't had maybe necessarily behavioral issues to get that kind of assignment. Is that correct? Was he kind of a compliant inmate up in?
Yeah, in order to be allowed and selected for or permitted to be an inmate worker, you have to meet certain criteria, and we're not going to allow people to be inmate workers unless they're not a problem. So there has to be some indication of that they're compliant, that they're cooperative, and they're not going to pose issues. That's why we allow them to be inmate workers. And of course, then they're getting gain time. Every inmate gets a certain portion of time every month. It's 5 days a month that they get in gain time by statute. And then they can get other time off their sentence, which is called good time. So it's called good and gain. It's a combination. And they get the good time primarily for working off their sentence by working in a variety of different work crews throughout the jail. So yeah, is that if he was a problem, he wouldn't be an inmate worker.
Do you know Deputy Moran's reaction to all this, to getting in trouble and losing his job? And
well, he was interviewed this morning and he made some statements. But what are you going to say? With what he did, anything that he said is just an excuse and trying to deflect and trying to mitigate and trying to save his own tail end over what he did, which was, one, a crime and totally improper and not something that we're going to do anything other than what we did, which is to terminate his employment, charge him with a crime. And I'm kind of speechless on it because it is so ridiculous and it is so outside the bounds and it is such misconduct. And anybody and everybody out there knows that we don't treat people this way. We don't treat inmates this way. And it's so contrary to what we do and the obligation we have regarding the care, custody, control, and the proper treatment of people. It doesn't matter who they are. It doesn't matter where they are. They're still people, and nobody deserves to be told, get on the ground and give me 50 using profanity for simply giving a cookie that's going in the trash to a bird. It's one of the stupidest things I've ever seen. And it's, and then when the guy is clearly exhausted, he walks up and kicks him in the side. I mean, people don't need to be treated that way. They shouldn't be treated that way, and we're going to take swift and effective action, and he's going to be dealt with accordingly.
But what did he say?
Well, what he said was just that he did it because he thought he mitigated. He said, well, I didn't really kick him. I nudged him. I was trying to get him going. And those types of things. So I haven't personally talked to the investigators that interviewed him this morning. So he was just interviewed a little while ago. But that was the gist of what I got from the interview.
The kick obviously takes it to the crime level. I'm just wondering if there was no kick and just push-ups, would this be a different situation?
Yeah, well, there wouldn't be a criminal charge. Is that it would have gone through the normal internal affairs investigative process, and then I would have made a decision on what to do with it to close that internal investigation. But because it's a criminal charge, because it's a battery, then we're doing it the way we're doing it, which is very fast. Now, normally under our process, this came to light, on this incident last week, is that going through the normal process, it would take a couple months for it to go through the internal affairs process, and then we'd make a decision on what to do with it. But the crime here is because of the kicking.
I just wondered, like, she was asking about do you think push-ups have happened before? Because it did seem like he was,
Right.
like, it's not the first time he's ever heard that.
Right. Well, one of the things that we're going to look into, I mean, and one of the things that, Catherine, to answer your question is one of the things, and we'll find out, is that in the interview this morning, Moran did say that this is not the first time that he's done that as far as having inmates do push-ups. But, okay, you got a guy who is making that statement who has just been charged with a crime and terminated. So it's not out of the question that what he is saying is a self-serving statement to deflect responsibility on his part. So I hear you. I don't know the answer to that, but we're going to look into it. And I certainly hope that that is not the case, and it has not been done in the past, and certainly nothing that has been tolerated. But we're going to consider that as we look at this, and we conduct the investigation into O'Neill. So, the answer is I don't know, but just because Moran says that it has occurred in the past doesn't mean that it did, but we'll look into it. He's got a lot of reason to try and deflect and to make self-serving statements because he's trying to dig himself out of this hole that he really can't dig himself out of.
How do you spell his name?
Moran, M-O-R-A-N.
James.
Yeah, James.
Can you talk a little bit about, 2 weeks ago, there was another detention deputy that was not arrested, but terminated for
Right.
use of excessive force.
Right.
I believe maybe a month or two ago, there was another deputy, detention deputy, or jail deputy, that was also, a video came out on a guy in a wheelchair, I believe. Is there, are these guys looked into, like the background for these people who are being hired for these positions, are they being looked into? And for the people who are at the detention deputies who are at the jail now, what kind of training, is everybody, or the people, are people being retrained? Like, have you put out any new policies and procedures, being that we had a few the last couple months?
We don't need new policies and procedures. We have plenty of good and effective policies and procedures. People just need to follow them. This isn't a policies or procedures thing. The policies and procedures are effective, and it's, common sense is that you don't make inmates do push-ups, and you don't kick people when they stop doing push-ups. The incidents that you're talking about previously are very different from this. The last one, which was a couple weeks ago, involved Deputy Amy G., and she's the one who had the woman at the booking desk who was handcuffed, and the woman was swaying, and she claimed that the woman was a threat, and then she took her to the ground and the woman broke her arm. That's a very different situation because it is what we determined to be excessive force. G had a reason for doing what she did. I don't believe the reason is justifying the actions, but that doesn't mean that G's actions were criminal. So there's a big difference here between somebody who exceeds the bounds and had no bounds to begin with. I mean, what Moran did is just simply a crime. It's simply a battery. There's absolutely no, in any sphere at all, in any framework at all, and within any rails at all, there's absolutely no justification. It is simply a battery. It's an unlawful striking without any justification whatsoever. In G's case is that, arguably in her mind, so you also have to go to criminal intent if you're going to prove a crime. And you have to look at the totality of it. In G's mind, and I think that she was unjustified, but G wasn't committing a crime. She had a reason for doing it, although unjustified and wrong, and she was held accountable and terminated for it. And so when we had the one in the wheelchair that you're talking about, and that was Deputy Fox, and that was one where, now that one, the woman was biting in that one, and she was actually leaning forward. She bit another deputy. She bit Fox. And now Fox's actions, again, exceeded bounds, but it was not a situation where there was a crime or it was criminal. As far as hiring is concerned, we do everything that can possibly be done to screen the people we hire. They go through a very, very extensive process. There's a psychological evaluation where they are tested and evaluated by a psychologist. They go through drug screenings, they go through polygraphs, they go through a field background, a thorough field background. There's oral boards. We do everything we can in the screening process. And when you got 3,000 employees and 1,100 that work in the jail, you're going to have a few here or there that do these types of things. Unfortunately, it's just the nature of it. And also, unfortunately, is that I guess what I've learned over time is that for whatever reason, they tend to go in waves. So we have these things and they happen, but, in another question that is mind-boggling, one is that people just shouldn't do it. Just do the right thing and do your job, period, end of story. But everybody out there knows, as soon as you walk in that place, you're on camera, is that every movement that anybody makes in that entire place is on camera. So you're doing this kind of stuff knowing that the videos are there and it's going to be captured anyway. I mean, that also doesn't make any sense. So, but there's no policies or procedures that need to be changed. It's just that the people who are there, which the absolute majority of them do, just do the right thing and do your job. And you got a few that, in this case, but again, the situations with G and with Fox, they're very different than this. All right, thanks.